Okay, inshallah. Which is why I actually had asked on the little WhatsApp group if people come early, because I imagined that some people wouldn't have been here a couple weeks ago, and so I might have to go through a couple of things. But those who raise their hands are going to have the inevitable task of trying to answer some questions for the rest of the group. So I'm not going to do a full review. I'm going to rely on you to tell them what we covered a couple of weeks ago, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, so let's start. Alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wa salatu wa salam ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Allahumma alimna bima yanfa'una wa yanfa'una bima tu'allimuna wa zidna bi fadlika ilman wa ta'aliman innaka ala kulli shay'in qadir. So, was it yesterday or the night before? I was leaving the masjid, and someone said, "Oh, I need to talk to you. I've been bad-mouthing you, so I need to talk to you." I said, "What do you mean?" He was joking. He said, "No, I want to talk to you." So we went to the masjid. So he said, "I have a very simple understanding. I want to make sure you have the same. I heard that you're going to talk on organ donation in Islam tomorrow." I said, "Yes, inshallah, I will." He said, "Okay. So should it be the doctor who's giving the talk, or should it be a mufti, a faqih, or an alim giving the talk?" So what do you mean? He's like, "Well, who can answer that question? Organ donation in Islam." I said, "Of course, a mufti. If you're talking about what's Islamic or not, it should be mufti or an alim." He said, "Okay." And then he was waiting for me to say something. I said, "No, I'm not a mufti or alim." He said, "Okay." So then, khalas, the fuqaha have said that's haram. So why are you talking Friday night? I said, "Okay, inshallah." Okay, so we continued for a few minutes. I said, "This is good. What is your understanding? Have you read a fatwa?" He said, "No, this is what I've heard." I said, "So you didn't read any fatwas?" "No." I said, "Okay. All right. So do you know why they said this?" "No, I just heard it's haram." I said, "Okay." He said, I said, "When did this come up in your life?" He said, "Well, I went to the DMV, and my wife told me, my wife went to the DMV, and she came home, and on the back of her license it said she's an organ donor." I said, "Well, what'd you do? Why'd you do this? This is haram. Why'd you sign this up?" I said, Did you talk to her about it?" He's like, "Yes, I told her it was haram because I heard it was haram." I said, "Okay. Well, then what did she say?" She said, "No, I thought it was halal." I said, "This is the thing. This is the problem." And I said, "Did she read a fatwa?" "No." So the point being that we all hear things, but we don't feel that we have to figure out what they're actually saying, the fuqaha are saying. I said, what I'm going to do is actually going to kind of go through what the fuqaha are saying. I'm not going to give you my own opinion. You'll see it's very complex, what they're saying. But I will complicate it for you, because actually, at the end of the day, if this is an issue that has ijtihad in it, it's actually harder for you than an issue that does not have ijtihad in it. Because then it's upon you, incumbent, to understand what the fuqaha have said, so you can figure out if there's tahqiq al-manat, right? If this situation applies to me or not. You can go both ways, but it's not, okay, I'll do whatever I want. It is actually, then you decide, you have to discern what the rationale are, so then you can make your own istikhara as to which is the position that makes your heart, right? That your heart finds rest in. So it's actually hard and more important for you. Then it becomes farda ayn for you to understand. Yes, the dalil al-am is the fatwa of the mufti. I'm a Hanafi, so I believe this. But the point still is you have to figure that out, right? So that was the conversation after Isha a couple of days ago, I think. And so I just wanted to give that disclaimer. I'm not going to give you a fatwa. I'm not qualified to give you a fatwa. Sheikh Rami is in the back. Maybe he can give you a fatwa. I'm going to just try to be an interpreter, a reporter of what the fuqaha have said on this part. But what happens at this part is very dependent on what happened 2 weeks ago, okay? So again, Jazakallah khairan for coming. So 2 weeks ago, I gave you the why, how, and what of organ donation, all right? And the upshot of that conversation was that organ donation is not one thing. It's not one size fits all. There are lots of terms and divisions. So for those who were here 2 weeks ago, I'm going to ask one of you, whoever it was, to give me an idea of what are those divisions, those categorizations of organ donation that I covered last time. So anybody have an idea? Deceased versus living donation. Okay, and what is the marker of that? How do you differentiate between deceased and living? Brain death, right? In the United States, the brain death is the marker between living and deceased. Okay, another division. MashaAllah. Directed versus non-directed. And what does that mean? Uh-huh.
Indirect would say through the National Kidney Registry where we donate to someone.
Right. So directed versus non-directed, not indirect, non-directed. So directed is two specific groups. It could be family member, it could be a community, it could be my masjid community, it could be the Muslim community, it could be who, right, whatever grouping you want, and then if not, to anybody who needs it. Okay, very good. Any other divisions people remember? MashaAllah, yes, you were paying attention. This chain donation, where if you have a loved one who needs a kidney, you go and get, or some other organ, and you get matched. So you go to get matched and you're not matched. You can donate your kidney, or whatever organ it is, through a chain, and you correct a chain. So there might be someone else in the same situation where they're not matched for their loved one. So you donate, and then someone else donates to their loved one, someone else, and it could be one person, two people, could be 20 people in between, then your loved one gets a kidney that's matched for them, right? So they're chained donations, it's managed. MashaAllah, very good. So that's what I covered. For those who were not here last week, that's basically, okay, there are some nuances. We talked about living versus deceased, as you just heard. We also talked about this entity called donation after cardiac death, which problematized the whole notion of when death occurs, and we'll discuss that if you like in the Q&A. Directed versus non-directed. The other division I mentioned was life-enhancing versus life-preserving. So I gave the idea of a cornea versus a lung, right? A cornea to see is a life-enhancing donation, or an organ, versus a lung, which if you don't have two working lungs, you need at least one working lung. If you don't have one working lung, then khalas, you can't really live, right? So that's a life-preserving or life-giving donation. I mentioned the idea of organs, tissues, and vessels. So you remember when I was talking about donating a face? That was it was an allograft, which included an organ, skin, right, vessels, and tissue, versus just giving an organ. And this is all classified together. So my point is that there's many things here, many divisions. And then we talked about, the last thing we talked about is I mentioned to you that the decisional context, the context under which one person makes a decision, that authorization, can be different. It can be first person, I decide I want to. It could be a surrogate, my family member, making a decision on behalf of whether or not someone can retrieve organs, procure them, or presumed. I mentioned this idea that there's a push within many Western liberal societies to presume that everybody is okay with organ donation, and therefore, without asking, we assume consent, implied consent. All right, so that's what we talked about very briefly. And the ulama, the fuqaha, have had to respond to this context, and you will find, and I'll problematize to you, that they have not fully responded to this context. When you read a fatwa, I was talking about the person who I was going to ask him, okay, so did the fatwa you read talk about living or deceased, presumed, first person authorization? Was that the tree, or what was the fatwa? Because they don't talk about that tree, but it is different. There are different moral contexts. Okay, so the first objective today is to talk about the relevant legal and theological concepts that underpin, right, the dala'i, that underpin the rulings. I want you to know the different rulings, and I'm going to categorize them in three ways, inshallah. And then the goal of all that is to help you navigate decisions, right, and understanding. So we're going to have a case, we're going to go through a case, and you're going to give me rationale, both in favor or against organ donation, okay, from an Islamic perspective. Because all the discourse is Islamic. And I said discourse, so I want to start with that idea, right? So when we talk about Islam, my title was Islamic bioethics, right? So Islamic bioethics is, I'm giving you how I define it, okay? It's defined as a discourse, it's a conversation, it's a dialogue, right, between the Islamic tradition and medicine. Issues coming out of medicine, allied health sciences, they are in discourse with Islamic tradition. And oftentimes that discourse takes place between a physician, someone from the medical field, and a faqih, right, from the Islamic field. But that discourse evolves a lot more than just those two individuals talking. Because the question that's posed is framed by a societal conversation, perhaps, as we discussed, right? And the different framing can lead to different answers. So around that discourse is a whole bunch of other disciplinary experts who help us understand why is the question coming up in this way, And what are the implications of the fatwa? Should it be written in this way? So for me, as an academic who spends time thinking about this discourse, right, it's very important to understand the framing of the question and then understand the implications of a particular fatwa on society. Because on the end of the day, for those of us, right, who are living, I'm a physician, you're a patient, or you might be a physician, you need to apply something. And to be able to apply something, you have to understand the context it was created under, right, and the implications of that, because all the societal conditions might not be the same. What's Islamic about Islamic bioethics, so this is again on my pedestal here, but what's Islamic from my perspective, again, this is Aasim Padela, is that Islamic bioethics has to be tied to the scriptural sources of our tradition and the bearers of that tradition, right? So it is rooted and grounded within the Quran and Sunnah, and then it is mediated through the fuqaha. So as the guy asked me, I'm not coming here and spinning my own sort of views here. There are people who do that and say it's Islamic. It's not my role. I don't take that. So it's really grounded in its revelation, and it's linked to the bearers of that tradition. But if we're going to create Islamic bioethics, it's not just about law. It's not fiqh of medicine. Right? Fiqh has to do with what the act is, it halal and haram. But there's more to that. So before I do an act, I have intentions, right? I have some ideas of why I should do this, why I shouldn't do this, right? So you have to think about the agent as well. And then when I do an act, I have to think about the outcome. And in our tradition, there are different sources of moral thinking that deal with each of these domains. Fiqh deals with the act, but maybe you might say that the adab, akhlaq, right? That all, tasawwuf has to deal with the agent, right? And then you have what's the production, you might say this has to do with kalam, usul, you might even say maqasid sometimes, but nonetheless, what happened? So a fuller evaluation of whether something is Islamically bioethically appropriate has to do with the agent, the act, and the outcome, not just fiqh. Because fiqh will tell you something's permissible. Just like I can divorce today, marry tomorrow. Divorce the day after, marry again. Is that ethical? You might say no. I'll say it's legal. Right? So a bioethical notion or an ethical notion sometimes does not map one-to-one on law. And so we shouldn't just think about fiqh. But what we have in this domain is just those fatawa, those outputs of fiqh. And this is also why you have to think about the larger context. It might be permissible to do something, but it might not be the thing that your tradition calls you to do. Okay, so here's the case. You're going to remember this case. In the end, I want to ask you questions about this case. So we have a woman, Suhaila, right, who's married with 3 children. She's got diabetes, and diabetes is associated with kidney failure. Right? So her doctor informs her that she needs a kidney transplant. And why would the doctor say that? For many reasons. One, she's a young woman. A kidney transplant, as we discussed last time, versus dialysis has better longevity, 20 versus 10 years. Right? Going on all the dialysis is a renal replacement therapy, peritoneal or hemodialysis, right? That there is more morbidity with that. So he might say, yes, this is your option. Or he might say, this is a preferred option. Or might you just say, just seek a kidney transplant. You and I need to understand that there are other things out there. Fuqaha need to understand there are other things out there. But the physician might say, this is the preferred option, or might even make it like this is the only option sometimes, okay? Her brother is Sharif. 30-year-old male, he's married, has a child, no medical history, alhamdulillah, he's very healthy. And then there's Yusuf, okay? Yusuf is a 70-year-old male who's in the ICU at that transplantation center. He's been declared brain dead. Right. So there's 3 Muslim actors around which we're going to talk about the notion of accepting death or donating life through organ donation. So the first question that we're going to walk through, and you're going to answer for me, is it permitted for Sharif to donate his kidney to his sister, Suhaila? Okay, that's the first question. And that has to do with what type of donation? Living donation. And then the second question will be around Yusuf. Can his family say, I want Yusuf's organs to be procured for donation? That has to do with deceased donation. Okay. So those are the 2 scenarios. We have 50 minutes to get through it. So inshallah ta'ala, we're going to walk through. So I'm going to share with you some concepts, which are you going to see throughout the fatwas, okay? So first concept here, and I'm going, is the concept of human dignity. You hear this in a lot of conversations in the hospital. I'm using English concepts from the Western sort of biomedical industry, so to speak, right? Because this is what you hear when you talk to patients and doctors here. If we were somewhere else with other terms. But we have to translate those terms into things that we, as from an Islamic vision, can understand. So we talk a lot about dignity in the United States. And physicians, when they learn their trade, have this notion of dignity that's taught to them when you have ethics consultations. So human dignity, if you want to translate that into our tradition, has two conceptual analogs, right? Or we would call them theological equivalents, right? The notion of sanctity, right? Karama, and the notion of inviolability, hurma. Okay? So if you take these two terms together, the notion of hurma of the body and sanctity of the body, karama and hurma, they come together with something that's analogous, a homeomorphic equivalent to what would be used in our parlance here as the notion of dignity, or bodily dignity, or human dignity. Okay? So karama comes, the Arabic word, right, has to do with notions of honor. It's a special status given to humankind, right? As the Quranic verse, as I've shared with you, says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, right? We have honored the children of Adam, all of them inclusively, meaning that all of this group shares in that honor from whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given, right? The karamna, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has endowed this notion of honor upon the entire class of individuals, people, species of humankind, Bani Adam, right? In equal measure. So this is the notion of how, I mean, there's many things that come out for that, but I'm giving just a rootedness, a linkage to the Quran, because everybody asks me, where's the Quran? So here's the Quran. So there are many other things aside from that. But this is where it comes out. So the notion of karama comes there. This typically, when you think about it, translated into hadith, and when you look about law, it leads to what we call positive rights. That there are things you must do to fulfill the honoring of the individual. Right? It demands from us some positive action. Right? So we say it accrues positive rights. The other concept of hurma is opposite in that sense, right? So it comes from the notion of haram, hurm, right? All these prohibition, sanctity, sacredness, right? Bayt al-haram. And when it's referring to the body, it specifically means that the human body is sacred, right? Both as an entity that has a soul within it or not, being living or deceased. It contains this notion of hurma. So that leads to, as I said, haram, that leads to don't do things, right? It demands from us around it that you then treat the thing as something that's prohibited, like do not, negative rights accrue. Okay? So karama, do positive things to honor. Hurma, don't do things so you preserve, right, that sanctity, the inviolability of the human body. Now, how can this be violated in many different ways? But here's three that folk have written about in the context of what we're going to talk about today, right? Organ donation. So it can be violated by the intactness, right? The hurma, by just the act of cutting the body, or that is violating, that's threatening the hurma of the body, or by its functionality, right? So you somehow disable the functionality of the body, either in toto, by suicide, or some functions, right? And there's actually, for people who do, if you read law, there's actually gradation. So if I harmed someone's hand versus their hair versus their leg, I pay different amounts. This is our fiqh. So by the functionality of the body. And the third way is by objectification of the body, meaning the body is treated as a commodity or an object for trade or barter, or in somehow is not given the status of being something that's inviolable. Right? It's a fungible product. Those are three ways, okay? And they all relate to the organ donation topic in a second. So that's hurma and that's karama. Now they're very closely related. I told you that it map onto this notion of human dignity, that violating hurma by default compromises the karama. And if you don't honor karama, right, then you are you're threatening, you're violating the hurma. So there's a whole circle, right? So you have to preserve the sanctity, that preserves the integrity. Right? If you harm the inviolability, right? If you harm the body, then you're automatically disrupting the sanctity. Okay. The other concept now, so those are two, this is the third one, is the notion of darura. And you all know this, so this is very easy, right? So darura, darar, right? La darar wa la dirar fil Islam, harm, injury, right? And we all know this maxim, this qaida, duratu bil al-mahdurat, that we all talk about this because we use it in our life all the time. That necessity overrides prohibitions, right? In this case, that circumstances make things unlawful lawful. But here's the problem with this: that when we look at the fuqaha and when they're writing about using this qaida specifically, and I say this because we all use it all the time, willy-nilly, that yes, certainly if X occurs, there's the darura here, then Y is permitted, yeah? But what is X and Y is very fuzzy, particularly the X part. So some fuqaha would say darura traditionally just means life threat. You're going to die, certainly. That's it. So when you want to invoke this qaida, we need a dire necessity that's going to lead to the death of an individual. Some might say it's disability. Some might say it is actually a haja, it's a need that can turn into a darura, right? If you're going to compromise a need, not just an essential for life. So it can become very variable. And this is what and clearly if you, the other aspect is if you have a darura, that means there's no other alternative, right? Now some might say, okay, no alternative that is equal, or some might say no alternative, period. So it becomes in fiqh a little complicated. And the lay people just try to use this qaida all the time, and it's actually really problematic. So I just want to share that because you'll see it coming up in a bit. All right. And now the last concept, maslaha. This is also used a lot, particularly in the realm of fiqh of medicine. So maslaha, right? I'm using the notion maslaha am, it should say here, public interest, common good, right? Masalih al-nas. So obviously if you go back and read our usul, they're big scholars, Juraini, Shatibi, they'll all say, right, that all of Islamic law accords with human benefits. All of Islamic law, everything. Now, those benefits might be in this world or hereafter, but all of it is about benefits. So this is one of the golden handshakes in our theology, in our moral theology. If you were to classify maslaha, there are many different ways to do this. One of them has to do with how it's linked to, one of them I'm going to show in a second, how it's linked to the text, the nas. So maslaha mu'tabara, right? This is interests that are explicitly in the Quran, right? Or you'll say mursala, and this is, if you're a Maliki, this is what we use all the time in your fiqh, that these are mursala, outside of revelation, benefits that our intellect can get at, but they're not found in the scripture. And then mulghat are those that are rejected, okay? Because they run counter to what's in the texts. That's not going to come up in my talk here. I'm sharing this with you that it becomes complicated in that way. But what will come up is this notion of maslaha am or khas, which could either mean general or common. General to all of us, or, right? Or common amongst us, right? Or specific and private, khas, to a private individual, private person, or a specific class of people, okay? So am or khas is the categorization that's going to be important here. Now, on the basis of this is another contention, and we're not in the class of usul al-fiqh, but how far can you take maslaha as a usul? Some would say just when there's no nas, right? Or there's no precedent. Others would say no, we can open up the ijtihad to use this as an usul primarily, okay? All right, so back to our human actors for a second. Question one for you. So I shared, so how does the notion of hurma and karama relate to living organ donation? Anybody have any idea? In which way? So for whom? So the donor is violating their own hurma by donating. Okay, good. Other thoughts?
This is relative.
What's relative?
Violating the hurma of his body to donate. It depends why he's donating.
Oh, no. We're not talking relative. By definition, you are. Now you could say there's different grades, but this is not the question. The question is definition, not grades. Definition, yes, you are. By that act, you are violating. It might be permissible, right? But some might say it's not permissible. That's the point. But you are. So we can't remove that notion, right?
It's the karama for the recipient,
How?
because you are essentially elevating his status by improving his life.
Removing their disability, right? So now it's a positive right? So you're helping them reclaim their disabled organ wasn't functioning well. Now you're helping them reclaim a certain status, yeah? So you're honoring them. Exactly. But they're two sides, right? Two different people, two moral agents. Okay? So good. So that's what I want to get. Now, what about in the other notion of darura? How does that relate to living organ donation? Any thoughts?
I mean, if somebody has an organ dysfunction which is terminal, and there is no matching donor except getting it from a living donor, that's by definition it's darura.
If the person will die otherwise, yes. Yes. By definition. For the person who's struggling with organ failure, right? Is there any darura for the donor?
No. There is darura, but it's unethical. Those people who actually sell the organ. But that's become
Oh, I see.
unethical, and that's why it's forbidden by law.
But if you use that qaida, then why would it be? So he was saying that for the individual who might want to sell their organs because they can't sustain their life, and so they need money. I'm just adding to you, right? We're saying. So there's a darura to sell their organ. This, right? Is that what you're suggesting? But if it was a darura and you use that qaida, then mahzurat go away, yes? You see the problem?
It's tricky.
See the problem? We're not fuqaha. We like to use these willy-nilly. But okay, good. So at least this is, mashallah, you're all thinking. Lastly, what masalih are preserved by organ donation? Now, I don't want to say living, right? I'm just saying just generally organ. What masalih?
Functionality of the community, like, preventing, like getting someone out of dialysis functional and working and productive.
Okay.
I mean, resource. I mean, for instance, we know especially for kidney transplant. I mean, to care for a transplanted patient, costs much less money than to keep.
Okay, so resource allocation. Okay. You're talking about, so you were talking about general?
It's probably a public,
Okay.
public manfa'a, public.
Well, I'm asking is khas or is it am? So yours is am, is yours khas?
Both, actually.
Say more.
So, khas for the individual himself,
Okay.
but am for the whole society, that you're bringing more people to be productive.
More productive. Okay. So, mashallah, these guys are giving great answers, but they're also are part of the biomedical enterprise. So, we would like to hear some other people as well, inshallah. Khair. Any other thoughts? We're good?
What about if somebody is donating to his wife?
Okay.
I mean, this probably be more of a private.
Khas.
Somebody's wife
Specific, yes, yes.
has been suffering and whatever, and now he needs her to be more functional.
Right. So, and in that case, I'll show you the fatwas in a second. In that case, you might not use this notion. But khair, okay, alhamdulillah. All right, so now let's move to what the fuqaha say. So, my conversation with the imam after Isha. Okay, so here, if you were to look at all the fatawa, or I can't say all, right? But if you look at most of the fatawa on this issue, right, over the last 70 years, right, you will find that they can be categorized in three ways, generally speaking, okay? And we did some of this work, right? The first notion would be that, and I'm talking about organ donation, okay? So we'll talk about donation later on. So organ donation is impermissible, haram. Why? Because it violates human dignity, hurma and karama. And that's the first general base position. Now the asal is haram, meaning the base ruling is haram, okay? And they gave you those reasons. The second notion is that organ donation is impermissible. The asal is also impermissible, but it becomes halal, mubah, because of darura. So they're linked, right? The first group would say, no, you can't use darura. You can't use darura. The second group would say, no, okay, we agree with you, but we can use darura to make it mubah. Second position. Huh? I wouldn't agree with that. There's not always one. But there are alternate modalities. This is what we just covered 2 weeks ago, right? So for someone who's 73, you're going to tell me you always have to do a transplant? Why? If it's darura all the time. Right? So there's not always a darura. But that's the point. So you can't invoke darura if you have a alternative treatment.
But the replacement therapy.
And some people would say, doesn't matter if it's not as good. There's an alternative.
But this is organ specific also.
Which is why I started off talk saying what? It's not one thing, it's many things. Yeah? Okay. So, but I'm not trying to push back. I'm simply saying, right? So this is why we're here. We need to reason through these statements that we make because it's actually not as simple as people make it out to be. Neither the fuqaha nor the physicians. Okay? Third, generally speaking, is that organ donation is permissible. That the asal here is permissibility. Right? Because we have a qaida like that, right? So it's ibaha, right? So, but then the reason they say that it is not only permissible is because you can actually use the notion of maslaha, that it brings about public common benefits. Okay. Third position.
Is this the chronological evolution of the fatawi, or
No, I have more. Let me get through this. Now we'll have questions, so we can ask. No, not necessarily. It depends. Actually, the fatawa are, if you chronologically have changed certain places and others they haven't. They started off with one of these positions and they've maintained that way for 50 years. Okay, so here's an example. So you're going to read. I'm not going to read it for you. MashaAllah, you all can read. This is Fatwa 1 from Maulana Mufti Muhammad Shafi, rahmatullahi, passed away. Okay. And I've highlighted for you some things here. And some say this is one of the oldest fatwas on the topic. In this, I think 69 or 70, something like this. Okay. Do you see? What do we see? We see he speaks, this is in Urdu, this is a translation. But he's specifically invoking the notion of hurma and karama to say it is haram, khalas, right? And no exceptions, because he even says, if someone themselves says, I'm going to donate, no, you can't do that yourself. You can't allow, as the person was saying, right? You can't allow yourself to be party to this sin. Okay. Second, fatwa, an example. And I'm trying to give you examples of either juridical councils or grand muftis. So I'm not trying to, there's maybe others probably out there. Okay, which group is this? No. Right? Right? So necessary to save is darura. So the darura is not the person who is donating. The darura is for the recipient. And specifically, there's no alternative. Okay? Dialysis is not there or whatever else, because they're talking about kidneys. So look at the terms. If this is also in Urdu, it says it's valid, it becomes mubah, right? So again, now this is why you have to read the fatwas. You have to understand. We take a class when we were in seminary. We take a class on how to read a fatwa, right? That's what we did, because you have to understand the rationale being used to be able to apply it to an extent. So that's what I'm giving you. Okay, third. This is many years ago, not even Islamic Council of Muslim World League. So which camp is this? Maslaha. Okay. So this is a Maslaha camp. And because I said it's a discourse, right? They specifically talk about you South Asian people want to use no. It doesn't have to do anything with Harma and Karama. Yeah? Not only is it mubah, what do they say? It's mandub. Yes? So, right? So the fuqaha are talking to each other through their fatwas. Yeah? So, but they do notice, they agree, okay, look, it has to survive or revive. So which type of donation would this be? Life? Not life enhancing, life preserving. Right? You see? That's the qualification. This is not about your cornea. All right? And particularly even not, if you miss that, then he says, an essential organ. So we will, again, right? I heard someone say, oh no, there's no hurt. I need to understand what they're saying. Okay? Depends for who. Right? We were just talking about this, right? Because if there's renal replacement therapy, that's equivocal or even possible. For some people, it's actually not possible, as you know. I know people who start off with peritoneal dialysis, but they get so many infections that they just cannot continue to be on peritoneal dialysis, right? Or they can never get a good graft. Their options are very limited then, right? So it's context specific. All right, so here's my question for the group here. So Sharif, remember, is the brother, the 31-year-old brother, one child, no medical issues. His sister, 39, 3 children, diabetic, kidneys failing, you need a transplant. What should Sharif think about when deciding to donate his kidney?
His safety on the long term.
Sorry, his
His safety on the long term.
his safety, good. And this is why we actually had the conversation 2 weeks ago. Other things?
Is there another alternative? Is there like a cadaveric donor?
Okay, so you might say, okay, if there's a cadaveric donor, so I think it's the difference between 3 and 5 years. People wait for, like it's 3 to 5 years to get a cadaver donor, a waiting list. While if you were to donate living, it could be done next month. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. Very good. So maybe there is some morbidities that Sohaila has that make it very complicated to sustain the graft. So all those things, sorry, I'm just gonna go on. So all those things are true, right? And why we spent 2 weeks ago, I said, okay, first you have to think of, can you be a living donor, right? And each transplantation center has a living donor advocate, and they say, okay, he must be over 80, but usually less than 70, must be able to make a decision themselves, right? Not pressured, and must generally have good health. So he generally has good health, right? But if you have more than just one med for blood pressure, you're actually not allowed to donate, right, your kidney. And also, what we didn't talk about, there were costs. I said it's not free, right? There are costs of rehabilitation, there's costs of donation. If you have insurance, the person who has the failing organ, their insurance will cover the cost, but they won't cover this recovery time, right? So we have to think about that as well. And I mentioned to you that you can go online, put in your medical history and your background, and get a risk calculation of how likely are you to have kidney failure after you donate a kidney. It is increased. It might be increased fourfold if you want to scare someone, from 0.24 to 1%. But for some people, actually, it might be higher. So when we say, right, that there are harms, this is a harm. It's tangible. This is empirical data. Okay, we talked to all of us a long time what the benefits are. All right, okay, so now back to our case, inshallah ta'ala. So I'm going to ask a different question now for Sharif. I'm sorry, the same question for you. So is it permitted for him to donate his kidney? You're the faqih here. You're the counsel to this guy. So who says it's permitted? Who says it's not permitted? Tell us why.
I think I think it depends on, like, if Yusuf doesn't exist, then I could have raised my hand.
Well, Yusuf doesn't exist right now. I'm just talking about Sharif. Sharif went.
All 3 of them exist.
Yes, we're going to talk about Yusuf later. He's not here right now. Right? So Hela has to talk how it works. So Hela has to talk to her brother. Right? So but her brother is thinking whether I should give it to my sister or not, or am I permitted? So all I ask is it permitted for him to donate? And you're saying no. Okay. The answer is Both. Both, right? Didn't I just go through fatwa as I said it's impermissible to donate? Didn't I just show you that? So it is both. It is both permissible and impermissible for him to donate. What is the Islamic opinion here? It is permissible and it is also not permissible for him to donate.
I mean, honestly, if Suhaila is known to be non-compliant with the diabetic medication, and I'm not kidding. I mean, that's why those people, they go to site evaluation and whatever.
Yeah.
And then she's going to damage this kidney in a year.
And then her brother will be so upset with her.
No. My point is sometimes they've said, why her brother will donate her a kidney?
Yeah.
And then she's going to lose a kidney in a year or two.
So you know, I fully agree. So the conversation you want to have is here, and the conversation I want to have is here. Yeah? No, I'm being serious, right? We want to talk about all these cases, and I'm not trying to shut you down, but I'm making a hypothetical case to delineate, as a teacher, the essential points that people need to know before they enter the conversation about particulars. This is still at some generalist level. But certainly, there are many things that will be involved, which is why, if you ask me, when we were here in the end-of-life care donation conversation a few weeks ago, what are we trying to do? We said, you need 3 people when you're thinking about these things. 3 people you should have on your speed dial when you face these issues. One should be a friend who knows you, your life. Because sometimes when you're facing an issue like this, you will start making decisions that make no sense to who you are. So you want a friend who knows you in your life and how you think and say, hey, wait, what are you talking about? Right? You need a faqih, or an alim, who you trust will do the work to figure out what the situation scenario is, right? They might be, I don't know, but they're going to go ask them some senior scholar. Or they're going to do some research. They're not just going to go on Google and say, okay, khalas, yeah? So you need to have that. And then you need a physician who's not trying to sell you anything. But they can tell you, okay, this is what the doctor is saying. I would ask this of the doctors. Because I want you to clarify the medical situation. Those 3 people, and I can say that generally speaking, when you're issues of like this, right? I don't know what to do. Those 3 people should be in your speed dial before you make a decision. And then, of course, you do your salat al-sakhara and you get your answer. But you need to ask. Those are the people you ask. Because this is a complex scenario. Maybe you get them together. But, right? So we can get there, but I just want to get a base ground understanding here and to get rid of the myths that exist outside the masjid. Okay. And that's basically what I'm trying to do. Yes, go ahead.
No offense, but do you have anything recent? I mean,
Yes.
people aren't American.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like from 1985.
Very good. So we're getting there. Let me finish. I'm looking at the time. I'm worried. Okay. All right. So Yusuf, yeah, is the other case, but we're going to get to him in a second. All right. And the question for you right now is, can the family, I should say the family, not they, donate his organs? Now I'm using the word can. Is the family authorized to donate his organs? You should know. You should know, because, okay, so to make speed up, I'm not asking permissible Islam. I'm asking you can. And this has to do with just what? Here in the United States. And they donate his organs? Yes. I'm not asking anything about Islam. I didn't even present that, did I? I didn't present. So recognize in the context you are, right? You were worried about Yusuf, that in this case, if he hasn't said anything, right? The family in the United States is authorized to make that decision. Now, your own families, have you thought about that? This is what I said in my little text. That it's required by law to ask a family when the death is happening, is he an organ donor? No, can we? They don't ask in that way, but that's required by American law. So every one of you have to think about this and talk to your families. Okay. So living deceased, I mentioned, is on brain death last time, so just a little review of this. On brain death, I've written a lot on brain death. We can spend a whole day and a half on brain death. But what I want to tell you is that it's contested as a category of whether this entity meets the legal threshold, the threshold for legal death in Islam. Okay? Some say it does. Some say it does not. So either it is a legally dead state Islamically, or it is a dying state. It is both. Huh? Both. You can consider one dying or dead. Obviously not the same person. Huh? But it is both by the jurists. Now the implications of that are that in the United States and around the world, living and deceased donation is based on this notion of brain death. So it has a big implication. If you're going to follow a mufti, their view on some organ donation notion, you must trace what they say about brain death. Because if they said brain death is living, is dying state, then for them, the fatwas on living donation include brain death. If they said brain death, right? If they said brain death is, no, a dead state, then their donations on living donation don't apply. Yeah? So now I'm not just saying you look at one fatwa of a scholar on this topic, you have to go trace back what they said about brain death or not. So to be consistent. Here are some of the debates, just for a second, and I want to speed through this given our time. That, and I used our Egyptian ulama here because they're both of the same class. They both were grand muftis, both Azhari trained, but even amongst them they had different views, right? That Sheikh Lantawi said, no, death is a medical affair. Let the doctors decide what death is. Sheikh Ali Jamal said, no. Death is a thing that we have to think about as religious scholars. That's what death is. We must get involved. And even two premier juridical councils had different notions. Even some, right? So one said legal death, brain death is legal death, and they deferred to physicians to diagnose, and they said, okay, if they say it's brain dead, the person's dead. While the other group said, no, it's a dying state. Because medicine is probabilistic. They can never understand if the soul is left. Why are we letting them decide when death is? All right? And we don't agree with this notion of here of the Ahl Khibra here, because death should be known by the common person. Like the dog is the same for the human. Doctors can't say this is a different notion, okay? I share this because they also use maslaha. So those who are saying brain death is okay in Islamic law, meets the threshold, they said this is because of maslaha. Why? They tie it to organ donation. There's no doubt about this. The question was framed in the context of organ donation, which led to the ruling on the brain death. Okay? The other group said no such thing. We don't care about organ donation. We just care about whether we can know the state exists. So because the patient who's declared brain death has breathing, has heartbeat, even if assisted, we invoke istishab, right? You need a high yaqini proof to say the person's not dead. To say the person is not dead, right? The patient is dead. All right, so I go through this all in the end of life care seminar. We weren't here. I'm not going to go through it all now. That's all you get, all right? Because it took a long time. I just wanted to show you the true rulings. And to complicate it, even the group that said it's okay that brain death is a dying state, hayat ghayr mustaqirra, what do they say? Premier fuqaha around the world, right, came across and said, no, you can't do organ donation still. So now, in the context of brain death declares living or deceased, you can see there's a huge problem here if you don't trace this fatwa. Okay.
What do you mean by brain dead but still living? Is it on life support?
Yeah. You know how long a person has survived, who's declared brain death? The longest living person after being declared brain dead? Make a guess.
They can be there for years and years.
Yeah, make a guess. 8 years. Okay, you're going to have to come to another seminar. They have to invite me because I said I can spend a day and a half. And so I don't want to. I was asked by the sister, okay, why are you talking about 1985? Well, this is a 2022 Fiqh Council of North America, no Egyptian fatwas, no Pakistani fatwas. This is when we were involved. It took us a year and a half. Sheikh Zulfikar is not here. You should have been here. We spent a year and a half. I was involved in some of this, a year and a half trying to debate this. So this is, and you'll find at the end, there's a booklet that you all can take that cites that fatwa. And I'm going to go through some of the aspects of it. But I want you to read this because it's too much for me to read. This is the synopsis of that fatwa, and I'll go through some of the conditions. Okay, so I'll read it. So they start off saying there's a difference of legal opinion about the permissive organ donation, right? So that's how they start off. But I'll actually synopsize it for you. So they say that the weight in their view is of permissibility. Okay? Just a general topic. So they don't necessarily agree with those who say that asal is impermissibility. The asal should be permissibility. Okay? But when you can invoke that is by in this domain. One must be living or declared dead by cardiopulmonary criteria. So living donation, meaning living, kidney we're talking about, or after the heart stopped and the heartbeat is stopped. That's the permissible zone for invoking the permissibility of organ donation. Which means what? Brain death, no. Okay? And they say if you do that donation, the harm to the donor, even the deceased body, must be minimized. So you have to take care. There's hurma there, right?
But they only declare people dead if they have direct.
They're not talking about brain death. They're talking about donation.
Donation.
Yes. So I'm not quoting you a fatwa from the Fiqh Council on brain death. I'm quoting you a fatwa on donation. If you want, they deferred the notion of when we're going to talk about brain death because it's very complicated. But they were talking about, fuqaha have said no for maslaha because of brain dead donation. They disagreed with that notion. Okay, so that's the synopsis. And they talked about in this country, because there are some issues here that I just told you about family. So see, the next point was after the harm to Muslim minimized, the individual must make the final decision. Family? No family. Family can't give someone's organs. You can't. That's how actually organ donation occurs mostly in the United States. The family's approached. No, the individual you bear the responsibility to talk to your family, but you must make the decision, right, if you're living, and after death even. So you must make a declaration before. So family should not be just saying, okay, yeah, I don't know, I'm going to assume. No. This is not your responsibility. You don't take that, right? You're not going to do that. Okay, so that's the basic synopsis. But they list out many conditions aside from that, okay? So they prohibit the harming of the donor recipient because of hurma. I'm showing you the rationale. They prohibit selling organs. It doesn't occur in the United States, but people from other countries think about this because of hurma. They say the consent of the authorization must be of the donor, right? Because if you don't have that consent, you can't, because you're all responsible for your own selves, taqlif, right? You're mukallaf. So you, right? Right? So you're not, no one can make that decision for you. Obviously, you can't donate a vital organ yourself while you're living, because that will cause you to die. So this is prohibition of suicide. Last time I talked about many different organs here, so I'm going to get to some of that here. You can't donate any reproductive organs. Now, I'll talk about that in a second. There's another few slides. And then I mentioned this idea, right? Deceased donation must be after heart stops. Because they didn't want to talk about death. Brain death is a very tricky, complex topic. Maybe Sheikh Yasser, who's now the head, I think might want to take that up, but it's very, very complicated.
Can I ask you a question? I mean, if you're going to just allow donation after the heart stops, you're
Yeah.
jeopardizing a lot of organs.
I disagree with you. So there are studies upon studies from Albany Medical Center where Orthodox Jews have shown equivocal outcomes after cardiac death. You've declared that before. You know you can do DCDD, and you have equivocal outcomes. That's actually now a myth based on, right? Because
You know, the outcome is probably similar, but the problem, there is a big difference between mobilizing the whole transplant team and waiting and whatever, and that
Sure.
actually goes like into the benefit and maslaha and resources.
So I just said to you, I want to report to you what the fuqaha have said, yes? And I want to have the conversation here, because we're now at 15 minutes and not here, okay? So let's just be a little bit, let me speak to not one person but the crowd. There's a lot of things involved there, but your responsibility is to not sin, yeah? As in our responsibility, I don't care what society is doing. I want to be secure in my own afterlife. قُوا أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَهْلِيكُمْ نَارًا. Yes, there are conditions. Yes, there are darura. But this is what I said to you. Stop invoking darura every moment. First, I have to think about myself. Then I think about what is my Lord told me, and make your sakhara. And if you say, I want to promote societal things, yeah, I was involved with the brain death donation debate in the state of Oman. We had a huge debate, and they came up with whatever they wanted to come up with. We're not those people in Oman thinking for society. We're thinking about ourselves. So leave it at that. Anyway, like I said, there's a whole workshop. We don't have time for this. So The other thing is transplantation versus donation. I shared with you the fatwa on donation. Recognize that transplantation is a different context. It's either necessity darura or it's mubah. To transplant, right, because donations are related to transplantation, but they're two different ahkam here. Because they're two different people, two different contexts. So it's either darura or it's mubah, or darura, right, based on darura, or it's mubah. Donation is either mubah or haram. It's never, right, they said mandub, but it's never wajib. It's never wajib. Okay? All right. So separate them. If you think about physicians and our ethics training, we don't separate them. Because that's the mantra from secular ethics. This is not our mantra. All right. Moving forward. So this, now I want to go through this what I was saying. So last time we spoke about, from the medical context, what can be donated when you're deceased and when you're living. Now you know it's complicated what deceased means. And I want to talk about a few of these things that we didn't have a chance to fully last time. So medicine is responding to human maladies, right? So any disease is created through a cultural value system. Long conversation. But it's not just about a physiological state. So we know that fertility is declining around the world, right? Even amongst Muslims. And therefore, there's this notion that infertility is a disease. And you'll see even some ulama saying this in their fatwas. But infertility, the state of childlessness, is not a disease of physiology, necessarily. It can be, but not necessarily, right? And there are medical solutions to childlessness, but there are also social solutions to childlessness, right? And if you think about our tradition, what we know, Zakaria made dua, that there are other ontological ways by which we can secure having children or having a child. But what I want to talk about is that organ donation, so that's another topic, another seminar, but organ donations become involved in this as well. And how? Because we have sperm and egg donation. I spoke about this last time. That's regulated not within the medical context, but outside of. Right? If your children are going to go to Harvard and they're girls, or Yale, they'll go to their dorms and they'll be, hey, you want $5,000 to donate your ova? You'll see that. That's going to happen. Okay? Because it's regulated outside of the system. Sperm donation similarly, right? People can go and donate their sperm. Uterus transplantation is involved. So what are the fuqaha say about sperm donation? These are Sunni rulings, Shi'i rulings are different. So haram, just simply put haram. Why? Because they say that it resembles adultery. Now people, laymen, have sort of said, well, how can that be? Right? What happens? You donate a sperm somewhere else and it's transplanted, it's put into the uterus. There's no dukhul here. How can it be adultery? How can you use this verse that says la taqrabu zina? Because it's not about this act. It's about the process and the result. The process is that some alien sperm is entering the uterus, not the husband's. Okay? And the result is you have a child without a father. A named father, a known father, a legally permitted father. So it's not about dukhul. It's about the process and the outcome. Okay? So that's that. Over donation, haram, hifz al-nasl. We can talk about maqasid here. But becomes complicated. So what are the dalail here? So this is the tahrim, right? Yes, yeah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, what does he say about, so it's talking about zihar, but there's a very important part here. In ummahatum lillahi waladnahum. That definitely your mothers are those who bore you, gestated you, birthed you. This is the definition of your mothers, right? So don't say your mother. Zihar is another issue. Shaykh Rami can give a whole lecture on that. But so that verse is used to say this is the definition from our nas, from our text about what a mother is. That a mother is one who birthed you, gestated you. Okay? So egg donation is impermissible. Now, for the fans of darura, there's a potential exemption because of mitochondrial diseases. Okay? And again, another seminar. But here, we should know that genetic linkages, DNA is both within the nucleus of the cell and the mitochondria. And sometimes you can have diseases of just the mitochondria that have DNA. So there are techniques, what they call triparent babies in layman's terms, where you have the ova that take the nucleus out, and you just have the mitochondrial DNA. Then you put in the nucleus of the mother, of the true mother, or supposed wanting to be the mother. And then you have the sperm from the father. Okay? So there might be, and the fuqaha haven't given real great rationale here, but there might be a little exception here. Uterus transplant. Okay? So the notion of transplant I mentioned, right, it can be wajib or mubah. But here the issue becomes that some fuqaha have said all sex organs. So when you go back in time, they said that includes uterus, ova, sperm, penis, all of it. Some have said, no, it's just the ova and the sperm because of genetic linkages, okay? But an interesting notion within this uterus transplantation was like, no, we actually did mean uterus too. Why? Because in the Quran, Allah subhanahu and various hadith, Allah subhanahu talks about the fact that bonds are created by ulul arham, right? And so we use that word also for the uterus. Maybe Allah knows and we don't know. And there are graphic hadith about, right, the umbilical cord. We heard it today in the khutbah, right? Or yesterday or something like this, last week. That about the umbilical cord is still attached to those fetuses that were spontaneously aborted, and they will drag their parents. So there's this whole metaphysical reality. We don't know what's going on here. We don't want to deal with that organ and that process. Let's just stay away. Allah knows best. We'll include uterus within it. Okay? So some will say haram, but some say no, mubah. All right. So that's the predominant of the lecture. We're going to end, and I'll take questions. But I mentioned to you that this pamphlet is there for you to take. It was resulted from a randomized controlled trial. I mentioned to you that this was a workshop. This was like a brief of a workshop, but we had a 2-day workshop on organ donation. And we had focus groups within people who would sit around, the lecturers would leave, and they'd ask questions of, I don't understand this, or I understand that, or help me think about this, or what's the pro, what's the con. Based on all those sheets, we created this pamphlet that narrates through a story to address the questions that people were thinking about, right? And it was endorsed by the Fiqh Council. So you go through living, right? Sharif story, I mentioned Sharif a bit. Medical issues, what to think about, religious issues to think about. You go through what organs can be donated, what the myths and facts are. And then, in the end, it's what's right for you, right? So it's a decisional tool. You should take that. The masjid has donated, printed these out for private printing, so you should take that home, look at it, but it covers basically what I covered in a little bit more of a narrative format so you can talk through it with your family. And I actually do encourage this. Make it a dinner conversation. I just told you that families are going to be asked, God forbid something happens to you tomorrow, right? They're going to be asked. So go through it with your family members. And now we'll take some questions. Okay. So we have 10, 12 minutes, alhamdulillah. Make them easy, please. Barakallahu feekum.
So, is it fundamental for, like for people who live in the United States and Western countries that they have to go through a Muslim doctor to go through this process, at least to oversight the procedure?
Is it fundamental? What do you mean by that?
Like, do you have to really consult with a Muslim physician about your specific case of donation?
So the fuqaha haven't said, in some cases, fuqaha say that you should ask, right, a trustworthy physician, ahl thiqa and all this other stuff. But in this case, the Sharia fatwas, they don't say that. So, but I said to you, generally speaking, I think we should have some trustworthy physician who can help us decode the language in a time of crisis, right? And to know what probative questions to ask. I mean, we're pressed for time as physicians. You might assume things that you understand, you don't understand. I know a patient sometimes they just shake the and then you say, well, what? No, I know. I didn't understand anything, right? So I think we should. That's why I was saying we should have a physician who we trust, who they could be Muslim or not Muslim, but know they can understand the context and help us make a better communication pathway between our understanding and that of the physician team, the clinicians. But there are different areas of fatwas that actually say you should ask a Muslim physician. And they say this for several reasons. One, when we invoke darura, they feel that the Muslim physician will say, no, this is not darura. Right? Because the way we oftentimes talk in medicine is that everything, we think that life is the ultimate value. Huh? But life isn't the ultimate value for us. Right? And though we can argue about maqasid all we want, but the people, even the classical, if you take Shatibi, he did said clearly that hifz al-deen is awla, is above hifz al-hayat. Now, modernists say some other things, but there's a debate. Nonetheless, we have two things to worry about, not just life. And for many medical practices, it's just about life. Right? Obviously, I go into medicine because I want to help preserve life. So I give all the conversation about preserving life. I don't know about deen. So they think that the Muslim physician will know a little bit about deen. That's an assumption that doesn't hold true, unfortunately. Muslim physicians aren't trained differently. They don't take Islamic ethics classes. They don't study anything. Sometimes they actually make a mockery of their deen, to be honest with you. Yeah? Nonetheless, there are amongst them this notion that they should be learning this, right? Just like anybody else. If you're a Muslim lawyer, you should know a little bit about Islamic law as well. So that's what they say. Now, the other reason they say this is because when it comes to your ibadat, you have to ask a Muslim physician to do tahqiq al-marat. Right? So they decide when there's a condition that you don't have to do wudu because you're always losing your wudu, okay? Well, okay, now what is the medical reason? Is there really a medical, is this happening? You should ask, not your nafs, you should ask a Muslim physician, and they understand your condition. Yes, okay, that's fine. Then you can use this ruling about worship, right? To check you against your istihawa. Okay, my arm hurts, so I'm going to pray sitting down because it hurts when I do this. I mean, right? I mean, you can imagine. So I check against you. So those are the reasons why fuqaha say this. And sometimes issues are just very complex, so you need both of them to come together and talk to each other. Okay. I'm going to, there's a hand there? No, someone just got it. Go ahead, Fadl.
I have just a comment.
No, behind you. Sorry.
So, the gist I get from the lecture is that it's not one model fits all. It's based on the need for the recipient and the donor, and what school of thought you are. But it becomes complicated because this was strictly for solid organ donation. But let's say we're talking about blood donation and stuff.
Yeah.
These blood drives, we don't necessarily know what the need of the recipient may be. So, what are the rulings in that case?
Yeah, so very good. Most people, when they come to an organization like this, they talk about this. They talk about these things. I mean, we have to have a special thought around tissue donation, right? It can be done living. Oftentimes, it's done deceased, right? And we would have to talk about blood donation. Yes, we consider medicine as an organ because we're taught this. Fuqaha don't really think about it that way. It's a renewable resource. So, I mean, we have fecal donation for fecal transplants, right? So we in medicine have categorized things in certain ways, but you have to understand how the fuqaha think about it in different ways, right? Because these are not the same categories. Like, okay, why is blood an organ? Why is it the same? Yes, because biologically this, that. Oh, no, that's not how we think about it because the rulings would be different. So those are special scenarios. Since you asked, I haven't read anything that says it's impermissible to donate your blood. And the reasons is because it's a renewable resource and it can benefit someone, so we can use maslaha. Even though those that say you can't do living donation, I've never seen. It could be there's something there that I haven't read, but they don't use the same analogies. They're not using hurma here. I mean, you get a pinprick, right? But they don't say because of that pinprick, you can. I mean, that doesn't work that way. Yeah. But the sterile organs certainly. And that's why I also went into this ovum sperm, because you see different dalail brought in there, right? They didn't talk about hurma and karama there, right? They're using different. So it's based on the, you might say still biological body part. There's different, nas that needs to be brought in to think about it. Yes.
My question is more about the mechanics, because we all have kids who are going to get licenses.
Yeah.
Okay, so then they listen to this, and based on whatever they comprehend from this, they check organ donor.
Okay.
So now we know that cornea is not allowed. But are there any things that are in place which where we can specify after taking the organ donor box that what we don't want to do?
So the brother here, mashallah, this today he showed me that in Wisconsin, because I still have my Illinois license. You can actually check. I do not want to donate, right?
On the registry?
On the Wisconsin license. I don't have one. Many states don't have that. They just have yes. They don't have a no. But so it's interesting, mashallah, that Wisconsin has a no. But I told 2 weeks ago that now it used to be the case, but it's no longer the case. It used to be the case that that each state was different around how they thought about first-person authorization. But now, nationally, first-person authorization is law. So no one can say no if they said yes.
But can they specify it?
Well, you can't. Your license doesn't have that thing. Yeah.
So once you say yes, then it's
You're on the registry until you say no. I want to be off the registry. And if you're on the registry and your family says no, he didn't mean to do that, or she didn't mean to do that, too bad.
well,
Okay. So they.
so my question is like, let's say for instance,
Yeah.
whatever fatwas were given in which I decided,
Yeah.
okay, based on these, I'm going with the one that says it's permissible,
Okay.
and I'm checking yes.
Okay.
But then even the one that says it's permissible says that the cornea or something is not allowed to be listed. There's still stipulations.
I didn't say anything about corn. I just said that.
I'm just saying there.
Okay.
What I'm
Yeah.
hearing
Yeah.
is there's still stipulation that some parts still cannot be listed.
Okay. Fine. Yes.
So can that be specified?
So the best way to specify that is through a document that's notarized. So again, our forebearers, our cousins, the Orthodox Jewish community is great at this. They have their own forms on brain death, organ donation, who to ask, which school they're following, all of it. And they carry it with them. And they have specialized ambulances that say, okay, I know, right? Because they have forms. Because they want to maintain their strict adherence to the law, to their law. And they don't want to deal with anybody else not knowing or someone else deciding. So they have these forms. I've tried for 7 years. I've been approached multiple times by people to have an end-of-life care sort of, and there was a tool because every state has different laws, right? So it becomes a little complicated. What can you do in this state? What you can't do in this state? And how do you write it? So you need a team to do that. And unfortunately, it's a great concept. People say, let's do it. But when you say, okay, it's going to take time and bring a team together, and then we have to write money, and we need to read the laws in each state, figure out what the form will be, put it on a website. Oh, don't worry. We don't need to do that. Because it requires research. And this is what the Jewish community did. No. We want it. We're going to make sure it's done so it's legally and it's binding and it fits within the legal qualifications and that people have access to it, right? So you can create some nice form. You put it on some website and it just sits there, then what's the point? You have to have an outreach and develop strategy, right? You have to get people, then you need consultation. How do we fill this out?
Well, I think along with the fatwa, then you should be also telling our kids.
I should be telling the kids, alhamdulillah, I'm doing what I can, but make dua for my barakah my time.
Thinking out loud. Maybe they should be told that.
So I'll tell you even something very interesting. Part of the reason, I mean, you weren't here, or maybe you were here 2 weeks ago, but what got me really interested, not really, well, really concerned actually, was that there was a grant, I think it's in New York State, where a company, a group of researchers developed a course module to put into the driver's ed classes around organ donation. So they had videos, they had survivors. And so now it became part of many school curricula that they show this organ donation video. And they show that if you just show this video, 7 minutes, whatever else it was, that when they go, because they were all taking the right driver's ed, when they go to the DMV, a lot of them say yes. All right? So, and, okay, so, but that video was one-sided. There was no conversation on, there are also harms and this might happen and whatever, right? And because it's first-person authorization, your family is now done now. They can't say anything. So I felt that in our community, if this is like what they're imbibing outside, shouldn't we have something for our kids? So I said on the West, I said, your kids, why aren't you talking to them? Where are they? Are they here? You're going to get them the license. You're going to get them a car after that. But why don't you bring them here tonight? Or why don't we have programs for them like this? I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm just being a little bit provocative here. So I'll get you in a second. So our responsibility to stay true to our deen is much higher than we think it is in all these conversations. Beyond that, you want to know even better? There's a whole game. It's called Orgomaniacs or something like this. That is within toddler preschool video games. So when you have this is another from the organ donation advocates, like, okay, we should have kids, so they have characters. Harry the heart, Larry the lung. And there's cartoons to make kids at this age, 7, 5, think about themselves as interchangeable body parts. Okay, we might say that's fine. I'm just saying to you, but it's out there. It's a value in society. So you don't think they're going to make interventions around that? Now, I'm not saying it's all wrong. I'm saying you should know, and then you have to have conversations. And actually, this is why the Sheikh al-Jum'ah was like, no, I think it was him. Yes, it was him. No such thing. If we were to say that human beings are interchangeable body parts, then the cat is out of the bag. So therefore, we say no to this notion of organ donation. Because the human being was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a ruh. We don't care about the body. We're not going to go into this conversation. Now, he may have changed his views, but he was very strict on that initially because he saw what was going to happen. That we think of just the body and not the ruh. The person just change all this, and then one day we'll become like cyborgs. Huh? We see that already in movies. So khair, anyway, I'm on my pedestal again. Fadal. Wa yaakum. Yeah. Yes. Yes.
So does it make it as mubah that way? You know, do they know that it's my thing specific? For example,
Yeah.
you know, somebody else from my family is better to have my cornea saved for some of my family members because they're pushing to
Correct. Correct. Yeah. Yeah. So he's talking about directed donation, and there was we had written an article. One of my students had written an article in Horizons on that. We discussed at the Fiqh Council as well. That this is also part of the forms. So if you create these forms, the other communities have it. They say, okay, here are the circles of priority after I am dead that we can have tissue donation, right? And so you immediately ask the family, because there are some people who have had burns, right? And they need tissues or other things. And so, and generally speaking, there are a lot of fatwa that say this is a good thing to do, right? We're talking about tissue or whatever else, cornea. So this is another way to get advance of the conversation. Say, okay, yeah, these things are okay, these things are not okay at this stage or whatever else is, but it requires us attending things, thinking through it, having conversation, and writing it up. But yes, you can. And that's actually one of the ways in which some Muslim communities have dealt with the public outcry, hey, you take but don't give. So no, we don't take and don't give. We actually try to come within our community first. That's it. And why not? Right? Because we have higher rates of compatibility with those ethnic backgrounds within our community. Last question. I think they're waiting for this mic or something for Isha. Yeah. Other.
How do you make sure that after you have died, if you are in a car accident in some other state,
Yeah.
and you know you die, and there your relatives are not with you, how can you make sure that you know they do harvest your organs after your heart has stopped beating?
By the form.
By the form?
Yeah.
And you have to keep that form with you all the time?
Or just not all the time, because they always ask the family, right? So if you didn't have anything, you didn't check that box, say, then we're mandated to contact the kin. And your kin would say, I know, because he told me about this. No. Only after this and these sorts of things, right? And you can actually make it part of your health record. So now everything's mobile. You can have your PCP, just like you have DNR forms. Here are my advanced care documents. Within it is this thing about organ donation. I mean, it's much easier than it used to be. But it requires what I've said. This condition, you have to spell it out, think about it, and have a conversation with your family.
So you would say the default you should say on the form.
I'm not going to give any fatwas here.
No, I'm not saying fatwa. I'm just saying, in order to ask your family, then you have to, the default should be that you would not be a donor.
Or you would tell them that you're a donor. And the conversation is what I'm saying to have.
No, but on the
Yes, if you have already checked it, then you've given us authorization, first person authorization, to procure your organs at the state of brain death or after death. Yes. Or after cardiac death, either way. Yeah.
Basically, you should check mark no so that they have to ask their family members and
I think that is one option. But I should stop. It's 8 o'clock. So, barakallahu fikum, jazakallah khair, may Allah bless you all in the masjid, spending this time with us. Barakallahu fikum. Keep us in your du'as. And I think they're waiting for the adhan. Assalamu alaikum.